What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're taking a look at Dark Magicians, which got a huge boost from the Megatins, and this deck in the near future is going to become even more better than it pretty much ever used to. With all the cards that Konami is giving us, this deck is coming very close to actually becoming a tier 2 strategy that can go toe-to-toe with meta decks, because all of those options that we have, they're just giving us a bit more every single time. And now I'm going to show you what the new card that we got in the Megatins can actually get for the deck, because the deck still has a lot of problems, but every time all those cards keep fixing every single one of those problems, and eventually the deck is going to become a very consistent, very powerful deck. But now, before we get those cards, we have to get a look at the deck as how it is right now, and while we're waiting for Battle of Chaos. So before we begin, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off with the monsters, of course, we have to play 3 copies of Dark Magician. Nothing to explain here. If you're playing Dark Magician, you're playing less than 3, then something's wrong. You need to play 3 because this card is the bread and butter of the deck. Sometimes you might even banish one of the copies or maybe even 2 with Allure of Darkness, so this is another reason you need to absolutely max, because you need at least 1 in order to be able to play, and if the third copy you have left with something like Allure gets DD Crowd or something, then the deck cannot function, so you absolutely need to play 3. 1 copy of Red Eyes Black Dragon, of course, you need this for your Red Eyes Fusion, there's nothing to explain about that. 1 copy of Dark Magician Girl. On top of being able to float with the Dark Magicians and drawing 2 cards with Soul Servant every single time, now you actually have a good way to summon Dark Magician Girl without having to play cards like Bond between Teacher and Student, which can be very bricky at times, and this is because of the new card that we got for the deck, which gives DMG a little bit more value. 3 copies of Magician's Rod, of course, it's the best normal summon of the deck, giving you a search right on normal summon, and you can retrieve it by activating a spellcaster when you activate a card effect during your opponent's turn. 3 copies of Magician's Souls. This is another card that people are just not so sure about playing in the deck just because it's so expensive right now. Konami, please reprint this card. We need a lot of reprints for the deck, because even the cards that didn't used to be so expensive, like the Dark Magicians, are now super expensive, so we just need a reprint of all those cards, because in Battle of Chaos we can already expect that the cards like the Ritual Monster that searches your Magician's Souls and your Rod, or maybe even Timaeus, will have a price. So if these cards don't get reprinted, then the deck is going to be so expensive, considering you have to play more than 1 Dragoon in a deck like this. So yeah, please Konami, give us some reprints, because a card like Magician's Souls, I can see why people don't play it because it's so expensive, but it's just such a good card. You absolutely have to play it if you want to play the deck at the best capacity you can, because it gives you access to all the monsters you need in the grave in order to go for your multi draws with your Soul Servant, and now you even have better way to use its second effect, discarding spells and traps in order to draw more cards, because before there were certain cards you didn't really want to discard, like your Eternal Soul. You want this to stick on the field, but now you have a way that gets the Eternal Soul onto the field while giving you fodder for this card's effect. So like I said, they keep fixing and giving this deck more problems, but all those cards that gonna arrive and during Battle of Chaos, they're just gonna absolutely fix every single problem of the deck. And another one of those issues that the deck has is that what if Anaconda gets banned? What if Red Eyes Fusion gets banned? That's another problem that's going to be fixed in Battle of Chaos, so Konami has already heads up for that. So we're gonna see exactly how that's gonna work when Battle of Chaos is released, and depends on how the ban list affects Dragoon. 2 copies of Apprentice Illusion Magician. As long as Anaconda is a card, I think you should be playing this, but if Anaconda gets banned, then this card doesn't really serve that much of a purpose, because it's not just here to get you to a Dark Magician. You want another monster on the field, because sometimes maybe you cannot get access to a normal summon or a special summon of your Magician Souls. You need to get 2 monsters on the field to go for your Anaconda. But again, if Konami ever bans Anaconda, then you should probably cut the Apprentice Illusion Magician with it altogether. For the hand traps, play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. This is the only hand trap that negates something in this deck, because it's just the most generic one. I won't be able to use it, and it's a deck that you have to play a lot of cards in order to be able to work, so I don't really recommend playing too many hand traps, because it's still a bricky deck. You don't have the Ritual Monster yet, which can search your Magician Souls, and having this Ritual Monster means that Preparation of Rites can search it too, so you can get 9 copies of. This is not a thing yet, we have to wait for Battle of Chaos. So for now, a bit of hand traps, just because if it's not, the deck is not consistent, then playing too many hand traps just absolutely crushes the consistency of the deck, and you're gonna brick a lot. And I play 3 copies of Phantasme. This is another card that has so many values in this particular deck, just because on top of having its effect that unbricks your hand and gives you a body on the field that can protect you from targeting, it also gives you a dragon monster, so you can fuse for your Dragoon with your Secrets of the Dark Magic, and it's also a dark monster, which can give you another target for Allure, because whenever I play Allure, I become a bit paranoid. I want as many targets as possible, because I have already lost a lot of games when I'm playing this card to other decks, so I just want to have at least 15 targets when I'm playing Allure in any type of deck, so I can actually think that it's worth playing, because if you don't play as many targets, sometimes it can just sit in your hand without doing anything. But in this deck, it's not that bad, because any spell and trap that you have in your hand, even if they're dead, even if they're multiple copies of a card you cannot activate, you can always discard them with Magician Souls to get even more draws, so it's not that bad in this particular deck. So yep, Phantasme, really great card. For the spells, we have 3 copies of Dark Magical Circle. Of course, it's the search card and the disruption, you have to max it out. 3 copies of Soul Servant. This is my absolute favorite card of the deck because ever since this card came out, it gave it so many options. First of all, what this card does is it allows you to play one of certain cards that you don't really need to play more because it can stack from the graveyard as well. So even if you want them, you can just retrieve them from the graveyard after your opponent has gotten rid of them or after you've used them. So it's not that bad playing less copies of cards that were considered absolute must 3-ofs before, cards like Navigation, which people have completely cut down to 1 copy now because they realized how much better Eternal Soul is of a card. So yep, Soul Servant, stacking your cards, giving you the extra draws, and during the late game, I also play another card that pretty much turns this card into a free pot of greed whenever you want, so this is another reason I love this card. Now, the new card is 3 copies of Magician Salvation. So this is a field spell for Dark Magician, something which the deck didn't really have before. Yes, you play Secret Village, but Secret Village, this format is not the greatest card, at least not in the main deck, because not a lot of decks play a lot of spells. Yes, it can work against Drytron, but against other decks, it's not gonna do much. So what this card does is, on activation, you can set an Eternal Soul from your deck. So already, this fixes the problem of having no cards to discard with Magician Souls, because if you had the Eternal Soul in your hand, you never want to discard your Magician Souls unless you had multiple copies. But now, this card, not only does it give you your Eternal Soul in the field, but it also stays on the field because it's a field spell, it's not a normal spell, so you can send it to the graveyard for your Magician Soul, and it's going to become even more relevant once the new Timaeus is out, because you need to send a face of spell and trap to the grave to special summon that monster. And also, this card gives you the way to summon DMG, aside from floating Dark Magicians, because when you summon your Dark Magician or your Dark Magician Girl, you can special summon the other one from your graveyard, so it gives you some more presence on the field if you want to keep this card on the field. Usually, you're not going to keep it on the field for too long, but if you do, then you can bring back more monsters. 1 copy of Terraforming, you want to search your Salvation as soon as possible. 1 copy of Secrets of Dark Magic, this is the searchable fusion spell. This is another reason why I think that Phantasma is such a good card in the deck, because if you want to play with your Red Eyes Fusion, then you should be able to go for your Red Eyes from the deck, but if you draw it, then you can of course fuse it with it. And of course, if you have your Phantasma, you don't have to use your Red Eyes Black Dragon, you can absolutely get to it with your secrets, so you can keep your Red Eyes in your hand, or if your deck, if you haven't drawn, thankfully, then you can use your Red Eyes Fusion to summon the second Dragoon, and then you can use your Magicalized Fusion, not for the Dragoon because I do not play 3 copies, that would be overkill, but for the Dark Magicians, so it gives you a lot of stuff to do. So Phantasma, I think, is a card that makes the deck a lot more consistent and a lot more potent on what it wants to do, which usually doesn't work this way whenever you play Phantasma, usually just a standalone card that helps you get to the actual cards of your deck, but in this deck can be an actual combo piece. 1 copy of Illusion Magic, I like this card just because sometimes you need to see a Dark Magician in order to be able to win, and even though you have all those searches, having a searchable card that searches you 2 copies of Dark Magician is never a bad thing, and this can also help you dodge cards like Veiler or Imperm if you hard draw it and you summon your Magician's Rod, so you can get a search on top of getting 2 Dark Magicians. So I really like this card. I don't see a reason not to play it, because some people have completely cut it because you can send with your Red Eyes Fusion your Dark Magician to the graveyard. Yes, that can work, but with Eternal Soul, sometimes you want to resolve your navigation, and sometimes you need more copies because you want to be able to fuse, and if you only have 1, then you're not going to be able to fuse for the Dark Magicians, but if you have 2 copies, then just having this and a Magician's Rod means that you have the Dark Magicians on the field right away. 1 copy of Red Eyes Fusion, of course, you're gonna be playing this card, so there are a couple theories about what can happen about Dragoon, and if Anaconda gets banned, I think it's the best case scenario for this particular deck, because you don't really need to play Anaconda. You can absolutely max out on Red Eyes Fusion, because just summoning Dragoon is not the play that other decks do without doing anything else, because you send a Dark Magician to the graveyard so you can bring back with your Eternal Soul. So even passing on Dragoon is really good in this deck, because you can keep disrupt your opponent with multiple ways if you have your Circle and your Eternal Soul in the field. So you would be playing more copies, of course, if Anaconda got banned. And another reason is because of the 1 copy of the Magicalized Fusion, which is another thing that you can abuse with Anaconda, but even without Anaconda, this card is going to be worth playing, just because it gives you access to the Dark Magicians and Dragoon after you've used your first one, so you can get more monsters on the field. So these are really good top decks regardless. So the deck does have recovery, and it does have the comeback potential it needs in order to be able to win, because both of those monsters are just so powerful, and especially Dragoon during the late game. If the game is simplified, then you can just absolutely body your opponent with the destruction effect, and then you can just OTK with 1 card. I do play 2 copies of Foolish Burial Goods with the 1 copy of Metal Force Fusion. I've been enjoying this engine in the deck for such a long time now, just because of the fact that during the late game, by sending a Soul Servant to the graveyard, you basically top deck a Pot of Greed every time you top deck either a Soul Servant or your Foolish Burial Goods. So I really like the dynamic, and it just makes the deck more iconic in my opinion, because YuGiOh was always top decking the Pot of Greed to get more good cards, so he could win the duel. So this is basically the equivalent of Pot of Greed during our game, because Pot of Greed is banned, of course. And during the early game, sending a Metal Force Fusion to get another draw is always a good thing. And like I said, those cards that would be considered dead in other decks, like drawing the Metal Force Fusion, it's not in this deck just because Magician souls exist, so you can send any spell and trap from your hand to the grave to get draws, and if you send your Metal Fusion, you get another draw on top of it, so you basically recycle itself and you get a +1. So yeah, these cards are just super good. And I do play 2 copies of Allure of Darkness. You can play 3 if you want, but I don't find it necessary, just because the deck already has enough draw power, enough searching, just because sometimes when you stack with your Soul Servant, you want to draw this stacked card, so yeah, maybe Upset would work as well, but this card just gives you more options, and with Phantasme, I think you have enough targets. You play 15 targets, 16 if you count the Red Eyes, but I don't really think you should ever banish the Red Eyes with Allure of Darkness unless you're absolutely desperate to get to some good. So yeah, Allure of Darkness, another great card. And for the traps, I play 1 copy of Eternal Soul, which I think is going to be the new trend for this deck. Of course, this card was never a one-off before the Megatins, but now with Salvation, you can get access to it very, very easily, and then, like I said, you can get it back from the grave with your Soul Servant if it ever gets destroyed, and even if it gets banished with card like Cosmic Cyclone, honestly, you don't need it super badly to win, because of cards like the Dark Magicians and Dragoon. Of course, you have multiple win conditions. Before, it was the only win condition of the deck, but now I think it's going to be more of a break when you hard draw it, because you want to get it by your Salvation so you can have another card to discard for your Magician Souls. So I think 1 is perfectly fine, and again, if your opponent destroys it with a card like Twin Twisters or a Feather Duster, you can just get it back with your Soul Servant. And 1 copy of Navigation, I think that's pretty standard now, because this card, it's mostly going to be used for its graveyard effect to negate a spell or trap, rather than using it to special summon a Dark Magician and a level 7 or lower spellcaster from your deck, because you do have ways to get the Dark Magician on the field, and this card, even if you draw it, most of the times you just want to discard it immediately to get even more draws with your souls, and then get it back, get its effect from the grave, so you can negate something. It's basically more of an interruption from the graveyard rather than a way to get Dark Magician. Usually you're going to be getting your Dark Magician on the field either with the effect of your Eternal Soul or by floating with the Dark Magicians. For the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Dragoon. You need to play 2 in this deck. Even if Anaconda gets banned, I think 2 copies are going to be optimal, and this is why I'm saying that all of these cards need a reprint right now, because if anyone wants to pick up the deck now, and they didn't pick it up when the cards were cheaper, then it's such an expensive deck that's not really worth the price. So this is why I'm saying that Konami just has to reprint all those cards before Battle of Chaos, because that's going to get priced to astronomical levels. The Ritual Monster is not going to be cheap, I can tell you that already. So yeah, this is why we need reprints, but Dragoon is just such a good card in the deck, and if you even don't like playing Dragoon in other decks, I think you can be excused if you're playing it in Dark Magician, because that's where it was supposed to play it in. So yeah, Dragoon, the win button, I don't think I need to explain anymore about this card. Pretty much everyone knows what it does by now. 2 copies of the Dark Magicians. I like playing 2 just because of Magical Ice Fusion. Sometimes you won't be able to summon the second Dragoon, either because you have already fused with it with your Secrets of Dark Magic by using a Phantasme, or this card in some scenarios actually can be better than Dragoon, because if you know that your opponent is playing a deck that doesn't really care about Dragoon that much, then this card can give you the advantage you need to grind, because Dragoon, if you know your opponent has a way to deal with it very easily, it's not that worth summoning. Maybe this card can give you more value, because not only does it float, so it gives you a disruption if you have a circle on the field, but the advantage that it gives you every time a spell or trap is activated is absolutely insane, and being able to draw into cards like Eternal Sword Navigation, activate immediately, just gives you the interruption right on the spot. So yeah, I really like this card. I think it's very underrated. People just tunnel vision on Dragoon every single time, but if you summon this card more often, I guarantee you that you're going to win more games, just because Dragoon is not the end-all be-all against every matchup. Yes, some matchups is auto-win, but not all of them. So yeah, this card, I think it's really, really great. For the Xyz monsters, play 1 copy of Ebon Illusion Magician. Of course, we're playing Dark Magician. This card can give you a disruption and another monster on the field. Actually, not a disruption, but it pushes through with your circle, so you can banish cards and then go for game. So yeah, it's a good card. And 1 copy of Big Eye, because sometimes you just want to steal those monsters. And for the Link monsters, play 1 copy of Anima. Because of your souls, you need to be able to steal those monsters if your opponent actually forgets that this card exists and puts a monster under the extra monster zone, which happens quite a lot, honestly. 1 copy of Imdak. You need to summon a dragon sometimes, and this is another card that can get you there, because if you don't have access to a way to get to your Red Eyes Fusion, if you don't have access to Phantasme, but you still want to activate a card like Secrets of Dark Magic, or maybe a hard-drawn Magical Ice Fusion, you need to make one of your Dark Magicians into this, and then either have another Dark Magician, or just activate Magical Ice Fusion to go for your Dragoon. This 1 Link Spider, this is another way to get to your Dark Magician in the graveyard, so you can get it back to your Eternal Soul. 2 copies of Anaconda, this is another reason why this deck is expensive. I'm sorry, but I mean, I'm giving you the most optimized deck right now. I know it's expensive, and I'm just hoping that stuff get changed by the ban list to cut some cards like the Anacondas, or stuff get reprinted, but now I'm just showing you how the deck is supposed to be played if you want to play it at its maximum level, and you need to play 2 copies of this card, because the first one is going to copy Red Eyes Fusion, and the second one is going to copy Magical Ice Fusion. So during the early game and during the late game, this is basically your strategy, so you can go for the easiest wins. 1 copy of Masquerena. Sometimes if you go into a super grind game, or if you think that Anaconda is going to get negated because you know that your opponent has a negate on the field, so it's not very worth summoning it, you can summon this instead, and then after you start baiting effects, even if you have another monster on the field, getting into a unicorn means that your opponent either has to negate unicorn or that has to negate Masquerena, which give you another monster on the field. So sometimes it's just much better, because with Anaconda the problem is that if you know it's going to get negated, it's not worth summoning because you send for cost, which means that you lose access to this one copy of Red Ice Fusion or this one copy of Magical Ice Fusion. You want to keep it until you're absolutely certain, unless your opponent has Valor Imper and you cannot be certain about that, but if you're certain that your opponent is not going to guarantee negate your Anaconda, so this is why Masquerena is just another good option. And for the Nightmares, play one Cerberus, one Phoenix, and one Unicorn, because these cards with Link Spider, they give you more access to draws, they give more access to disruption, and the extra deck is very toolboxy, so you don't really need to play high Link monsters, you just need to play those utility Link monsters that get rid of cards, because let's be honest, you're never gonna have enough monsters to summon Napaloosa or an access code in this particular deck. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I think that Dark Magicians, with every step where we're going forward, and Konami is going to keep supporting this deck pretty much forever, because along with Blue Eyes, these are the two idols of Yu-Gi-Oh! They're just never gonna forget these two decks exist. So with all these cards that we're getting, every single time, problems keep getting fixed, and I think that it's in a great direction, because Blue Eyes had always been like the most meta-relevant deck out of the two, just because of the timing that got the cards, but I know the Dark Magician fans just love enjoying and playing this deck, and they've been tweaking it a lot, and I think they've come up with really great stuff to make the deck work, and I'm guaranteeing you that after we get Battle of Chaos, you're going to be seeing this deck a lot, just because of its fan base, and just because it is actually going to be a relevant strategy in order to be able to opt into decent wins. So yep, that's it, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.